So, I don't recall there being much discussion at all regarding the evolution of the Disney prince, or the Disney princess in general as characters, and I feel like I want to look into them more to give them the attention that they deserve. The first person that's going to be discussed is Prince from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and there's no character here. We know that the animators had trouble and also lacked interest in animating and developing a realistic male character. He is not named whatsoever in the film, and is only in 2 scenes of the movie, one where he sings to Snow White in the very beginning, and the other is to reward her with a happily ever after at the very end. He is a plot device. He has no name, no discernible personality, no familial history or development on his past or present. We do know that there are a lot of cutscenes of his that would end up in a future Disney prince, but that's not in this one, so it's time to move on to the next. The second prince that is on the list is Prince Charming from Cinderella. Like the prior prince, he is just a plot device who is there to give Cinderella the happily ever after that she deserves. He is also in 2 scenes of the movie as well, mainly due to the animators having trouble with and also lacking interest in the realistic male prince. What is different between the 2 princes and in evolution is that we do learn more about his life. We see his castle where he was raised, we are introduced to his father throughout the movie, who he has seemingly become distant with according to his father's narration. We know that he went on to train to do great things, and we know that he has been rejecting a lot of suitors, as he didn't care to get married at this point in the movie. But we learn all of this from his father, and we never hear anything from him or his perspective on anything really. I actually think he has less lines than Snow White's prince, and most of those are singing lines. Also, he isn't even named in the film, and I don't even remember the origin of what caused him to be called Prince Charming amongst fans and Disney later on. So, the third prince is Prince Philip from Sleeping Beauty, and there are automatic improvements. 1, he is given a legit name, and it's said many times throughout the movie. 2, he is in more than 2 scenes of the movie, and actually has speaking lines throughout the movies, where the prior 2 princes mainly just had singing lines. We see him interact with his horse quite a bit. He's a part of the final battle with Maleficent. The other 2 princes are noticeably absent in the climaxes of the respective films. He actually interacts with his father, which wasn't the case for Prince Charming, and actually has a lot more snark and sass. It seems that by this time, the animators were comfortable with animating their male characters in a realistic way, but there's still some apprehension and disinterest in him as a character by the animators. At the same time, he is silent throughout the entire 3rd act, which makes him seem like a blank slate during the final parts of the movie, and almost kind of makes him unsatisfying in a way. While he also seems like a vessel for the other characters, mainly the fairies and Maleficent, to use towards their own advantage. We really don't know much about him as a person and a character, especially regarding his history and past, interests, etc. Especially compared to the other characters in the movie. And in some elements, we know more about Prince Charming than Prince Philip, though we see Prince Philip a lot more. Philip is an improvement because he is more proactive in the story, and a lot of that is due to the ideas of the other 2 princes, with their deleted scenes being added in Sleeping Beauty. It would take another 30 years for there to be another prince, where Prince Eric from The Little Mermaid is introduced to us. We see that he has no parents. We know that he has rejected quite a few people as potential suitors before Ariel ever came along, and we learn that he wants to fall in love for love, just like Prince Philip. Just from this, we know that he has some similarities to the past 2 princes. After he almost dies from drowning, he hears Ariel's voice and uses this voice as a way to find his quote-unquote ideal girl, where he is told by the people around him that this isn't a good idea. we actually see Eric living in his home and his kingdom, where with the other princes, we either saw their home, but not the prince interacting within it, or we saw the prince, but not them in their own home, or they just didn't have a home at all, from what we could see. Compared to the other princes, he has no parents, but he doesn't seem to be in any sort of power within his own kingdom either. So the stakes of his political potential doesn't really seem high, at least from what we see in the movie. Outside of that, we first see him as a sailor throughout his first several scenes, and he loves the sea. We of course see him spending time with Ariel, and they travel around his kingdom together, before spending the rest of their time on a boat or in water. Honestly, Eric doesn't seem much or really different at all from the prior princes, especially the two that immediately preceded him. I think the difference is that he spends more than one scene bonding with his love interest, and he's shown to actually have other hobbies. Actually, the main difference that I noticed with Eric is that he's the only Disney prince in general who doesn't sing at all. He has no solo songs, and he has no duet whatsoever, which is honestly very weird because we know that he likes music. That's established in the movie. He is very similar to the others, but just got a bit more screen time, and I think Ariel being made to be seen as more progressive and contemporary compared to the other princesses preceding her made Eric seem more updated and progressive and contemporary than he really was or is. So I feel like the Beast is the first major upgrade to the Disney prince, as the first four were very similar characters and one took a baby step from the one right before them. Actually, he's a step back from some of his predecessors in one way. He has no name mentioned at all in the film and is just referred to as the Beast. This isn't any different than the first two princes being labeled as the Prince in their respective movies. But he's the first one to be a co-protagonist alongside their love interest in their film, and I honestly prefer to call him the protagonist over Belle because he is the one that goes through the arc. We are introduced to him and his story first. The film's climax is based on him, while Belle's whole arc is to help him. He is the first prince to go through a character arc, and that is huge, as he felt like a character with his own agency and purpose, instead of being the generic prince. As we know, he starts off as a cruel, selfish, mean, vain person who is punished for it. Due to this, he becomes like the Beast and becomes a lot more insecure due to it, but he has to learn how to care about others, how to love, and how to not let things get to him. His arc was also about his looks not being the most important thing in the film. I mean, looks in general not being the most important thing. And it's about what's within the person. He is named Prince Adam, but that was not confirmed by anything within the film, and it has taken on to other means. I'm still honestly very confused as to how that happened. He's the first prince to really be given complexity, and is the first prince to not have perfect morality, which the other four, or the last two especially, who are shown to do something, are portrayed to be as. Aladdin is a huge step up and a game changer in many different ways. The first upgrade is that he's the main character of the film, and he's the first main character to be a Disney prince. I know that people argue about the Beast being the main character, co-main character, or a deuteragonist, but the fact that is debatable. Unlike Aladdin, is why I'm giving the latter the credit. Due to this, we see his journey and growth from the very beginning to the very end. He drives the plot, and everyone else is there to help or contribute to his story, whether for the good or the bad. Aladdin is the first Disney prince to have an I Want song, though he's not the only one to have an I Want song, though the others had to share it with another character. He is also the first because Aladdin is the first Disney prince of color, as he is Middle Eastern, more specifically Arabic, and his film takes place in the fictional Agrabah, which is clearly supposed to represent somewhere from the Middle East or South Asia, but most likely the Middle East. all of the other princes before are from Europe and are Caucasian men, so Aladdin's introduction shows diversity in the lineup, and non-white people can be princes as well. Another element that made him revolutionary in this lineup is that Aladdin was not only not born or raised as a prince, but he was outright from the lower class, so it added another dynamic to his character and how he dealt with Jasmine that the other characters just don't have. He seemed more relatable and approachable due to this, and not being in that 2% of the world regarding wealth. Due to this, he's the first person to marry into royalty. Of course, he, like the Beast, are not perfect on the morality scale, since he does steal for a living from people who are working hard to provide for their own families, and does nothing to improve his situation before meeting Jasmine and the genie. John Smith is a hard person to talk about, because he honestly should not be on this list, so I'm going to keep this one relatively short. Not only because he was based off a real person, but because he was not a prince and never became a prince. John Smith became a Disney prince without becoming a prince, so he's an evolution based off that alone, so props to him for that. He is also the first Disney prince to not get with his romantic partner by the end of the film, so that is another way that he's a ladder up from some of the others. He's also more morally gray, like the last two princes before him, due to him being a colonizer, but he also grows out of it, just like they did out of their morally gray elements. Oh, John is also one of the few Disney princes who has an I Want song, but he is the first to share his, as he sings with Governor Ratcliffe in Mine, Mine, Mine. Naveen is the only other one after him that has an I Want song, but he shares his with Louis and Tiana. Li Shang is also someone who should also not be on this list, not only because he isn't a prince, but because the woman he ends up with isn't a princess, never becomes a princess, and has no ties to royalty in her society or his society whatsoever. So, Shang is also good for diversity, since he is an East Asian man, specifically Chinese, so he gets another type of representation that isn't white. He is also the tritagonist of the movie, and yes, he is the tritagonist instead of the deuteragonist, so he's the first in that element too. Mushu is the deuteragonist of the movie, since his arc is more important and developed than Shang's, and we're introduced to him first, and we see his point of view in comparison to Shang's more. While he is not a prince, he is the first person who I see directly benefit from nepotism, and we see how people react to him and about him due to this. Shifu constantly reminds him that he only got the general job because of his father, and even the other soldiers just see him as a generic pretty boy who quote-unquote bought his way through due to his high-ranking father. I guess he is different because he's the only Disney prince who does not kiss their love interest. Heck, they barely hook up. Also, he does have a bit more gray elements to his character, since he has more sexist elements to his character, especially in the very beginning. Prince Naveen is an interesting one. He's the first prince since the Beast to actually be born a prince, and he's the first prince since Aladdin to become a prince, whether it is via marriage or being born into it or whatever else. So he's a return to form in these elements. He's also similar to Prince Adam and Aladdin because he is in the title of the movie he is in, and is arguably just as important as their female counterparts, obviously more important in Aladdin's case. It is arguable that he is a co-main lead or a co-protagonist with Tiana. Also, when looking through the 10 guys, Prince Naveen is the only one to have both of his parents alive in the movie, and after the movie ends as well. Most of the others only have their father alive, or both of their parents are deceased, or are just non-factors, like the prince in his case. What I will say is that he's the first prince where we actually see him being spoiled, and he has to learn how not to be that, and how to build his own. Kinda like the Beast had just turned into a beast, so we never see him as spoiled and having to learn through that process. Where in the end of the film, he actually gives up the throne to live a normal life, so he is a first in that element as well. Of course, he is a person of color, so he adds diversity as well. And he's the second prince to turn into an animal. I also forgot to mention in the Beast section that he's the first Disney prince to turn into an animal. He is a playboy too, so he's a bit more morally gray in this element, and he's not exactly the most honorable in this regard. Though of course he learns how to become monogamous throughout the film. He executes the quote-unquote spoiled prince trope that we have yet to see up to this point in the characters up to his introduction. Flynn Rider. Now that I think about it, he doesn't really add anything new to the Disney princess, but in a way, he's the full circle, quote-unquote, Disney prince. He is not the first Disney prince who was not born a prince, and I'm solely going off the information in the movies and not the TV spin-off that he is in. He is not the first Disney prince who is a thief. He is not the first Disney prince who is a deuteragonist or a cult lead in his movie. He isn't even the first Disney prince to die either, since that was the Beast who died in his film first. And he isn't even the first person to defeat or kill the villain. That was Prince Philip. He also isn't the first person to create a different identity of themselves. Aladdin did. So the difference is that Aladdin did this due to him needing to legally be a prince in order to get with Jasmine. It was just a means to an end for him. Flynn changed his identity because he saw his book hero as someone he wanted to aspire to like, and when he can have a fresh start for himself. His arc was about learning how to accept yourself and that personas are not the way to live life. I do believe he's the oldest Disney prince and might have the biggest gap between him and Rapunzel compared to the others and their love interests. So, there is that. All the steps that the other princes built the platform of the Disney prince of benefited him, and he is a combination of many of them, despite not being anything new or fresh. He's the result of the evolution from the others, and I think that's why he is a favorite to so many people. The Disney princesses to come out after Tangled over the last decade has no love interest, and while that is an evolution based on the princesses and not the princess, and there might not even be another Disney prince through traditional methods, or it'll probably be a very long time. Is there anything else that can be done with the Disney princess, if there were to be any in the future? Any that would be added to the franchise? If there are Disney princes added to the lineup, I think they are going to continue playing it safe. They might add some more racial minorities, but that is not a guarantee. Is there a way where any of them could be evolved if there are future editions? Yes. Making a future prince a father or making them not straight, but I don't see either of those happening. On its own, the Disney princes are not its own franchise, so whoever is added will be as a result of the princesses added in the Disney princess lineup. I don't think there's much else that can be done or that the company will do, but I am open to being surprised.